Howdy guys, so in today's video I wanted to continue the last video and share a personal story that I have from just campaigns I've worked on, and also tie it into being able to comment on some of the recent SEO updates, ranking updates that Google has made regarding their helpful content and the ways that they keep revising things to determine what kinds of content are helpful and not. And so, even though some of these changes have only happened in this last year, the story I'll share with you is actually like a good example of the earlier phases of that starting to happen a few years ago with Google, and where typical strategies that are often shared, I've shared them as well, where people will tell you, like, don't go after the hardest keywords first because you'll just spin your wheels and get frustrated. Go after some of the easier, less competitive, long tail keywords. That's good advice, but if you do that too much, if you focus too hard on that kind of strategy, you get yourself some quick wins, and you can deprive yourself of any long-term wins and really deflate the tires, so to speak, as you're going. And that's only become more true with these helpful content updates. And part of that, before I get into the story, is, you can see it now, just Google has like a list, if you will, of its observations of all of the most authoritative sites in any given industry. And if it notices all of those top sites seem to have really thoughtful content about this long list of topics, then if, say, your website only has subsets of them because you haven't gotten there yet, you're unlikely to rank for a lot of these difficult keywords, or even some of the moderate keywords that you might be planning, because Google will look at your site and say, there's just not enough here comprehensively, and it's missing some of the core things that the top companies I'm looking at have. And so I'll share a story with you to really drive that home. So a few years ago, I started working with a personal injury law firm out of New York City. And as I did my initial batch of keyword research for that client, it was obvious to me this was going to be one of the harder accounts that I had ever worked on, just because New York City is a big area with a gigantic population, tons of competition, and all of the competition were very large, very wealthy law firms that had giant marketing budgets. So this was not doing SEO for your local plumber, for instance. And so it was clear to me going into it, like, yeah, your pie in the sky goal is we want to rank for like personal injury attorney in the Bronx, in New York City, in Manhattan, wherever. But I knew going into it, that's a long-term goal. And I was upfront with the client about that. This is 6 to 12 months minimum, for those kind of keywords. Let's not even talk about them yet. And I had some good ideas for some tangential keywords that I thought would be relatively easy to rank for that would still be meaningful, like construction accidents and scaffolding accidents, crane accidents, personal trainer related accidents. Like a story he told me was, if a personal trainer gives bad advice that ends up making a person hurt themselves, or a person ends up tripping over weights because they weren't being properly supervised and advised and whatnot, and they end up hurting themselves, etc. A lot of keywords that we came up with around those little types of things. There was way less volume, but we did actually, in the first 60 days, rank pretty well for quite a few of those keywords, and that was an exciting win for the client and for me. They felt good about it. They were excited. We were ranking for those things. They were starting to get leads from those searches. Not a ton, but some. And so, as a first step for them, they were like, wow, this is proof the SEO is working. Awesome. Let's move on to harder keywords. And I had gotten a little ballsy myself from some of those early wins, and I think I allowed that feeling of like, oh, well, maybe this industry, as much as on paper and the analytics, it seems like it's super competitive. Maybe it won't actually be that hard. Maybe it'll, I'll be able to just knock this out. I got in my head. And I didn't take seriously enough the chasm of difficulty between the words that I'd gotten those early wins on and the ones that we were now looking at. And while I didn't make any specific promises to the client, it's not like I was bragging and saying, oh yeah, in another 30 days, all this stuff's going to happen. But in retrospect, what I also did not do was really drive home to that client, these keywords are no joke. And just because we had those wins, this is still a long climb. We're still looking at over 6 months to really build some perceivable momentum here, where we're really noticing like a good shift in those rankings because of just how competitive they are. But it'll be worth the wait, because even ranking kind of moderately for any of these phrases would transform the law firm with the kinds of leads they would suddenly be getting. I feel in retrospect from our conversations that had I framed it that way, that client probably would have stuck with me and said, okay, we're willing to invest because of the potential payoff. Run with it and let's see what happens. I think that's a possibility. And the big mistake that I made, other than my arrogance in that moment, was not making that clear. And so I think from their perspective, the idea was our next batch of wins will also come within the next 30 to 60 days, like we just saw. And we just did not. I went for another couple of months. I mean, there were still gains being made, but like not anywhere near on those harder keywords like what we had seen before. And by the second month beyond that point, everybody was just feeling a little discouraged. And they ended up wanting to call it quits with the campaign. At that point, I wasn't able to save it. And I didn't really want to like pressure them, like, come on, guys, keep doing it. Because I never like to take money from somebody who's not feeling good about the work that we're doing together. And in retrospect, especially with what I'm seeing happen now, it became clear to me too late on that account. Yeah, the problem with my focusing so much on like the construction accidents and the crane stuff and the personal trainer stuff is, other than having some core service pages that maybe themselves were optimized for things like personal injury attorney, we weren't really like moving the ball forward on that keyword from the beginning, or what other topics that we could talk about that directly support that keyword without leaning so hard on this tangential stuff, that by the time we were on month 4, at the end of that campaign, Google must have been looking at that site and saying, look, you've written some good stuff here about some of these topics and I've ranked you, but you're just really missing a lot of the core types of content and articles and just the way that the main pages are like ba-bam about these search words, and all of the big dogs have that, and the fact that you don't have that concerns me, is almost like what Google was saying. And so there was really no way at that particular phase of the campaign that client was going to rank for any of those keywords. And I just didn't take seriously enough at the time how much I had limited myself with my early goals and being so focused on tangential stuff. The bad part too about like going so hard on these long tail words is eventually you run out of long tail words that are still worthwhile, that still have real buying intent to even go after, and you do end up with a certain point of saying, I've plumbed all of the quick wins that we're going to get, and now we have to, go after the bigger stuff and really put ourselves out there. That's a long game, and you just have to take that seriously. Even if you can get some kind of quick wins for a client in 30 to 60 days, which is not something you ever want to promise because it doesn't always happen, but even when you can, that is not indicative of your ability to, from there, do anything. It's still a long haul, and you need to be straight with yourself about that and straight with clients, if you're a pro, about that as well, of saying, like, look, we need the quick wins because we need to have something making some money and, helping to feed the continued marketing investment in this. And hopefully if we're making enough from some of those early wins, it helps us be patient for the long term. But the long term is the long term. I've got clients, that I'm grateful to say have been with me for all 6 years that I have thus far to this date been in business. That's rewarding. And the things that I've been able to do with their websites just because of that sheer amount of ongoing time are very cool. But with none of those cases, if I had gone into it saying we have a 90-day plan and only thought that far, I was really fighting with one arm tied behind my back. And sort of as I mentioned in my previous video, you look back and you say, I had been having wins, but those wins were only one part skill and also one part luck at that point because it just wasn't finely tuned enough. I would say, just in summary, some of the key takeaways that I would say that I got from that are always be doing, say, like a 75-25 split of, even if you're mostly targeting your easy keywords earlier on, always be kind of optimizing and creating some of your content around the really hard stuff just because you need to. Always be being broad. Don't allow certain categories to be forgotten about in the aim of certain, and that can be helpful thinking about your content in terms of clusters. And so you could look at it like, here's a list of 50 blog posts that big picture I would love to write for this site. and let's clump them out by a kind of category. These 5 or 6 of them are sort of loosely related about this thing. These 5 or 6 are about sort of this topic, etc. And as you write them, be thinking of those clusters in mind. Maybe you'll say, I'm going to write 3 to form this cluster, and I might want 6, 7, or 8 in this cluster big picture, but after I've got the 3, I'm going to now fill out one of these clusters. So over the course of 90 days, I've got several of these core clusters completed, and that helps you with the things like when Google comes to look at your site, it's like, yes, there's a fairly wide breadth of like knowledge being demonstrated here. It's not like we've done 10 blog posts about this one core set of topics, but then everything else about your industry we don't really talk about. Simple analogy would be if you wanted to run a website about bicycling. It's fine to focus on mountain bikes, but if you over long enough don't have any content about racing bikes and BMX and that kind of stuff, how authoritative can this site be on cycling if you only ever talk about mountain biking? And so you've got to make sure you're covering all of the different major bases there. And certainly don't allow hubris to stem from any early wins you get. It's fine to high-five yourself a little that plan that you made worked, but never think that getting some early on wins guarantees you anything in terms of what you can expect 6 months in, etc. It's always going to be a climb. Every win you get is going to be hard won. And if you're smart, you can leverage the early wins to compound upon themselves for the harder stuff, but you have to be more strategic than I had been in that story that I had shared to pull that off. And as a generalization, I would say when you're setting yourself goals, whether you work internally in your business or you're an SEO pro, whatever length of time you think is feasible for some goals you're setting, add at least 25% onto that. Just plan for the fact that nothing is ever guaranteed in this industry. There's always a bit of trial and error in any SEO, no matter how much data you have, and you need to allow yourself a little time to be able to make pivots when not every idea sticks completely. So if you say, I think I could do this in 4 months, maybe give yourself 5 or 6. Just set that as your goal. That's easier to keep expectations in line, to not be discouraged, and to help maintain that you can keep summoning the degree of energy that it takes to move everything forward and keep it going well. Hope you guys thought this was interesting. Appreciate you listening, and I will catch you in the next video.